Hello from Toronto. My name is John Keogh, and welcome to the Future of Food 10 by 10 Expert Series. And in this episode, I'm delighted to have with me my good friend and former co-author, Carl CJ Unis. Hello, Carl.
Hi, John. How are you?
Or is it better I call you CJ?
Please do.
Okay. CJ, the 10 minutes goes very, very quickly. So in the first 30 seconds or so, can you tell the viewers who you are?
So my name is CJ Unis. I'm a systems engineer, and I create clarity from complexity. So what exactly does that mean? So I deal in complex systems. I deal in cascading failures. I deal in continuity of operations. I deal in devolution. In complex systems, we deal with a lot of things. And in the systems engineering world, we deal with ecosystems of ecosystems. So it's being able to take some of the things that are going on in the real world and understand how they develop, how they potentially fail, and protecting against or designing resilient systems around those activities.
Fantastic. We'll mine into some of those for sure. Now, CJ, in your experience and most profoundly in the last 6 months with COVID-19, what do you think are the key challenges that the food industry is dealing with today?
The food industry is dealing with a lot of things right now, John. They're trying to reinvent themselves on the fly right now, as we have discussed. There are some things that were designed for a quote-unquote blue sky day, but unfortunately that blue sky is awfully dark right now. And unfortunately, there's a lot of things that people need to consider with regard to how these systems have been built, how they are performing or not performing right now, and kind of reimagining the way that they think about these problems on a multitude of different levels and in a multitude of interdisciplinary problems.
Mm-hmm. Well, wonderful. I'll mine into some of those challenges as we go through the conversation. So on the flip side of that, what do you see as the key opportunities for the food industry?
Some of the things that are key for the food industry are they're multifaceted. So they have to look at the way that their old business model currently existed. They have to look at the way in which they're thinking about these problems now, and they have to look at this through a different lens with regard to systems thinking, as we have discussed in the past. So systems thinking brings all these interdisciplinary natures together and understanding how those things interact, how they are connected to each other, and how they may fail. Because most enterprise systems, when they start failing internally, and then they start failing catastrophically. And everything that they're connected to in that holistic system will ultimately fail as well.
Gotcha. Now, I want to go back to what you talked about earlier in the challenges. And you talked about the most multidisciplinary approach. Is one of the challenges, in fact, to develop this multidisciplinary approach within companies and with their business partners?
It absolutely is, John. And from the standpoint of what is going on in a certain division in a company, over, we'll say in distribution, may not be vocalized to what's going on over in sales or marketing. And we have seen that time and time again, and there's a multitude of different disconnects that happen, or as we have called them, cylinders of excellence, otherwise known as stovepipes.
The stovepipes. Now, how can organizations tackle those challenges if they have those stovepipes within the company? What is the first thing that they must do?
Communicate, communicate, communicate. So I can't say that enough. One of the biggest disconnects with regard to companies or enterprise systems is the ability or inability to communicate what each division or what individuals are doing, and being able to vocalize that not only through the C-suite, but to also understand the how, the what, and the why things are being communicated in a timely manner, because some of those things are actionable knowledge or potentially actionable intelligence within an enterprise organization. If we're not talking about those things and those things are not actionable, they could literally be internally setting themselves up for failure on a multitude of different scales, as well as from the C-suite perspective, other VPs may not be communicating with each other in a manner that is conducive to productivity.
So communication is important, CJ, but how about the cross-disciplinary education?
Absolutely. So the cross-disciplinary education is very, very critical from the standpoint of it becomes, like we used to call in the military, a team of teams mentality. So everybody has their own set of specific skill sets and things that they do, but you bring it together as one cohesive unit and understand how are we going to meet our objective, and how are we going to do these things that is ultimately going to be able to accomplish the mission or the task at hand.
Perfect. So CJ, I want to go back to the opportunities. You mentioned systems thinking was very important. And of course, we have co-authored an article And the article is around systems thinking or reimagining the future food chain. And we also talked about the cascading consequences of system failures. Can you explain what that really means? What is that cascading consequences of system failures?
Absolutely, John. So cascading consequences of systems failures are all the interconnected systems that make an enterprise run with regard to infrastructure, with regard to human capital, with regard to communications, with regard to logistics. So all of those things come together as a holistic system to be able to execute on a task or an enterprise for that matter. When a little ripple in communications or a little ripple in logistical supply chains happens, it has broad and far-reaching consequences across the enterprise. Being able to understand how those things propagate and being able to look at, to be able to set up tripwires in that system are critically important. So you're doing that if then. So if we do this from a decision perspective, then this, and this have the propensity to happen in a positive or negative manner.
That's a great point. And let's mine into the tripwires for a moment, because we brought that up in the article, and we talked about a tripwire as being a pre-alert. In other words, to give you guidance or to give you a warning that something may occur rather than something happening in real time and then trying to fix it. How important is it to get that pre-alert of something that may occur but has not yet occurred?
It's absolutely critical, John, from a number of enterprise perspectives. Being able to understand that tripwire is critically important because it throws up a red flag per se, and it allows you to go, okay, we may have a disruption here. We need to get ahead of the 8 ball per se before it really causes some internal enterprise problems that could ultimately impact our entire enterprise on a multitude of different levels. So being able to understand how we go about doing those things, why they're important, and looking at those quote unquote tripwires is critical for enterprise architecture and people designing systems, because it allows you to kind of tee up the ball before you hit it out of the park in order to understand what some of your future problems could potentially be.
Gotcha. So if I look at a food plant, for example, now a food plant should be as concerned about the performance of their local gas, water, and light companies, right? Because they're dependent on gas, water, and light. They're dependent on the telco. They're dependent on the internet, right?
Absolutely. And that's what we like to call in the systems engineering world the lifeline infrastructures that support the activities that are occurring. So it's looking far beyond the scope of the things that support your enterprise architecture. So if your electricity goes down, what happens? If your communication goes down, what happens? If your logistical supply chain goes down, what happens? These are all interconnected problems that fundamentally are not being addressed from a systems thinking perspective. And that's why it is ultimately critical to be able to have these conversations and to be able to potentially red team this in a tabletop exercise, to be able to recognize what some of your gaps are and do some further analysis along those things so you can create resilient systems architecture within your enterprise.
Gotcha. Now I want to mine into that desktop exercise just a moment. We have about 1 or 2 minutes left. But if we look at the United States or North America, I think, natural disasters will happen in different areas. So can you talk about that a little bit, and how can companies prepare internally for something that may occur naturally or unnaturally, man-made?
Absolutely. So geography is going to have a huge impact on where the said company does business. So what's going on in Florida with regard to an emergency management plan may be very, very different what's going on in the northeast quadrant of the United States, or the northwest quadrant of the United States, or the southeast quadrant of the United States. So those plans have to be custom tailored to the geography that the company resides in, because what you're doing in the Midwest is going to vary differently than what is going on in Texas. And the most recent storm that just occurred in Iowa that I just heard about literally today, it was considered an inland hurricane, and there were 120 to 140 mile an hour winds near Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I was blown away by that. And the destruction that it caused was insurmountable.
I think that's very important. So in one area of the U.S., you have issue with fires, like in California right now. In other areas, it will have snow. May have hurricanes, tornadoes. You may have rivers that overflow. So the geography is a very critical component as well. Very quickly on the tripwires. The tripwires can, of course, be software. It can be an alert that's set into the system. They can gather data like an AI tool and so on. So that becomes very, very important. But also very important, CJ, and I just want to confirm my thinking on this, is that the people within your organization or with your solution providers who are developing algorithms they cannot do that without having the process owners with them, correct?
That is absolutely correct, John. So operational context is a critical constraint to any type of analytical tool development. If you don't necessarily understand what's going on the grounds from an operations research perspective, being able to do further analysis to validate your models is critically important. So getting input from the people that do versus the people that analyze, both of those houses of thought have to come together so they can flush out the problem in that gray area that we're talking about in a tabletop exercise potentially, and looking at what some of those vulnerabilities are within an enterprise system.
Wonderful. And I think what we're also seeing now recently is we're seeing algorithms that are on borderline ethics, that there may be racial profiling or may have something else in there. So it's not just the process owners, I think, it's also the HR, the people that look after the ethics within the company and its legal status as well. So there's guidance for everyone. CJ, in 30 seconds, if you were up in front of 50 CEOs of startup companies in the food industry, in 30 seconds, what guidance would you give them?
The biggest guidance that I would give them, John, it's time to think about capabilities and systems, not technology. Those systems of systems are ecosystems of ecosystems, and being able to look at the problem through a different lens is something that's critically important to understanding your broader, more contextual, fundamental problems that are driving your enterprise and driving your industry. If we don't start looking at these problems, there are bigger issues that are going to be had, and potentially that business system or that business enterprise have the potential to fail catastrophically. And I would also suggest that looking at these problems from a different way is going to be very important in driving their future activities now that COVID is still running its course.
Gotcha. Ladies and gentlemen, there you go. We went over a couple of minutes, but this is a very important topic. And I want to thank CJ for sharing his wisdom with us today. CJ is a former Marine and, of course, a veteran. And I want to thank you as well for your service. Like myself, I've also been in the service, and it's great to talk shop, as it were. And don't forget, folks out there, hire a vet. They got a lot of skills and competencies that organizations can really use today. CJ, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us today.
Wonderful, John. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.